Hey guys, my name is Aldas, and in today's video we're going to be doing part 2 of my rise of Red Bull. Now, you guys really enjoyed the first part, and if you haven't seen it then go check it out. Of course, it was from the beginning of Red Bull till 2009. Now, in this episode we are going to be doing from 2010 till 2014, which is of course Red Bull's most successful years. And hopefully it'll be another good episode. Don't forget, if you enjoy the series and want to support the channel, then like the video, subscribe, all of that good stuff, and yeah, let's get into it. Now, as I said in part 1, Red Bull were very, very impressive in 2009, and there was always a worry whether they'd be able to maintain that success and that level of car performance into 2010. They maintained their driver lineup of Sebastian Vettel and Mark Webber, which worked very well in 2009. And going into 2010, there wasn't too many major rule changes, but there were a couple of tweaks. There was now no more refueling, which means the cars actually got a little bit bigger, as they would have to fit the bigger fuel tanks that would last the entire race. And there was also a couple of small technical changes, but the biggest one being that the tyres actually got a little bit smaller, just to aid the stability of the cars. Now, coming into 2010, Red Bull managed to carry their form from 2009 with their brand new car, the RB6. It was a very, very quick car right from the get-go, and clearly was, if anything, the best car on the field. It managed to take the first two pole positions with Sebastian Vettel, and arguably would have even took the win in both of those races if it had not been for reliability issues. Now, this is something that I talked about a little bit in the part 1, and it is something that is going to be creeping up a lot with Red Bull and throughout their entire history, and we'll talk about a bit more of their reliability in part 3. But in terms of the start of 2010, it would have took the first two races. Sebastian clearly had an advantage, but in both the first two races in Bahrain and Australia, he had issues. In Bahrain, there was a spark plug issue, which cost him the win. And then in Australia, a loose wheel nut, which again caused Vettel to retire. Despite all of these setbacks though, Red Bull's performance was undoubtable, and they eventually did start winning races, and they got their first win in round 3 in Malaysia, where they won 2 with Sebastian Vettel taking the win from pole position. Now, this finally kick-started their season, and then the next 4 races, they managed to win 3 of them. But it was quite worrying for the other teams, because Sebastian Vettel arguably could have took the first 3 races had it not been for those reliability issues. Now, Mark Webber perhaps didn't have such a lightning start to the season, but it finally kicked in for him, and he showed that he is a true championship contender. He took back-to-back wins in both Spain and Monaco. Now, with Mark Webber taking his first ever Monaco Grand Prix in 2010, it was a flawless weekend from Mark in 2010. I mean, arguably the best weekend of his career. He was just a class of his own that weekend. I mean, there was just incredible celebrations of him in the pool and everything. So happy with the team, and it was really just finally great to see them. I mean, Monaco is special to everyone, and they had previous success there before, actually. Like I said in part 1, they got their first ever podium there, so it was a really good weekend for the team. And I mean, Mark Webber had, like I said, a stellar weekend, and just showed how serious he was of a championship contender, not only leading the championship, but now Red Bull were also the constructors leaders as well post Monaco. However, in the next few races, Red Bull really would go from high to low. They really showed their inexperience in terms of driver management, and there was even signs that Mark Webber perhaps wasn't valued or treated as fairly within the team. Of course, I'm referring to the famous Istanbul crash between the two Red Bull drivers. Now, in Turkey, after leading 1-2, both Mark Webber and Sebastian Vettel were involved in an incident that basically just handed the win and handed a 1-2 to McLaren and Lewis Hamilton. Now, this incident is quite widely, when you look at the replays and everything, a lot of people point the finger more towards Sebastian Vettel. I'm not saying for a second that he is 100% of the blame. That is absolutely not true. But he seemed to take a little bit more of the blame in the eyes of the pundits and the eyes of the fans as well. However, Red Bull actually blamed Mark Webber for that crash, and that was really wrong. That was a really bad situation for the team, because it showed that there was almost favoritism towards Sebastian Vettel, and Mark Webber was really not happy with this. This was a very big mistake for Red Bull blaming Mark Webber, and Christian Horner later admitted that it was a mistake to blame Mark Webber and that it was not handled in the correct way. And this was the first time we'd ever seen sort of almost clear sort of bias towards Sebastian Vettel. It was a really wrong precedent, and it just left quite a sour taste. And I mean, that's where the rivalry and the tension between Mark Webber and Vettel really reached their all-time high, and it really needed to be managed a lot better by the team. And that was their first sort of mark of inexperience, because just remember, this is a really young team. They didn't quite manage the drivers, in my opinion, very well. And I mean, yeah, it was a big negative for Red Bull that weekend in Turkey. Now, another highlight of the 2010 season was one of the biggest crashes we've ever seen in Formula 1 history. It was, of course, Mark Webber and Heikki Kovalainen at Valencia, a 190 mile per hour crash that sent Mark Webber up into the air, basically. It was so spectacular, but happily, he was all okay and everything. It was just a really crazy crash to watch, especially from his onboard, literally. He apparently even broke the brake pedal. He was trying to press it so hard. So, lucky, like I said, he was all good, but a definitely big highlight for the 2010 season for Mark Webber there, that's for sure. Now, in Silverstone, midway through the season, Red Bull were clearly the strongest by far. 9 pole positions and 5 wins from 10 races. And again, a win in Silverstone courtesy of Mark Webber. However, that weekend was dominated with even more signs of favoritism towards Sebastian Vettel. Now, what I'm speaking about is the front wing incident. Now, both the cars were fitted with brand new noses at the Silverstone Grand Prix weekend. And in practice, Vettel broke his nose, and they actually decided to give Mark Webber's brand new front wing and nose to Vettel. Now, this really did show signs of favoritism because it was really confusing why they would give the upgraded nose back to Sebastian Vettel when his broke and remove it from Mark Webber. It showed signs of absolute favoritism and clearly that there were almost factions within Red Bull that were favouring Sebastian Vettel. And to me, Christian Horner really did not manage this very well at all. He said, and I quote, "The only thing that I regret is not having a conversation with Mark before qualifying. It was wrong and we should have explained it to Mark." Now, to me, that is really... They didn't even explain to Mark Webber why his nose was just getting removed. They just said, we're going to give your brand new nose to Sebastian, who obviously broke his. And that really, I think, it shows it's just horrible by the management to not even have the conversation with Mark Webber about why they removed his nose. So I think it just, again, showed signs that perhaps Sebastian Vettel was just being more favoured by the team. However, despite Sebastian Vettel taking the pole position on the Saturday, it was Mark Webber to take the win on the Sunday and famously saying at the end of the race, "Not bad for a number 2 driver, cheers." Clearly showing that there was a bit of friction between Mark Webber, Sebastian Vettel and the team management. Now, to round off the first half of the season, Mark Webber took another win in Hungary. And the car that Red Bull really was head and shoulders above the competition by far. And this was due to 4 main reasons. Now, number 1 was the additional downforce that they had been able to channel using exhaust gases through the diffuser. Adrian Newey had once again pulled through it with an amazing design that clearly gave the car a huge advantage over the field. Number 2 was again fantastic aero with a low centre of gravity, a drivable and fuel-efficient Renault engine that, despite it having some reliability problems, it was a quick engine nonetheless. And then lastly, and most importantly, was their front wing, which at speed actually flexed and allowed for a huge amount of downforce to be put on the car. Now this was very controversial with McLaren, but despite all of the controversy that Red Bull came under for their front wing in 2010, it passed all of the tests and was deemed legal. Now, coming into the last part of the season in 2010, Webber was actually leading the championship. However, Sebastian Vettel, and he always had the speed. He didn't quite have the results, but we always knew he had the speed. He came back stronger than ever. In the last 5 races, he finished with 3 wins and a 2nd place. And the other one was sadly a retirement in career, which was a double retirement for the team, which was a really low point. But like I said, 5 races and 3 wins. Sebastian Vettel came back stronger than ever. He was just on another level in the second part of the season, and that ended up being, just enough in Abu Dhabi with Alonso and Webber failing to finish on the podium, which they needed to seal the World Drivers' Championship. Sebastian Vettel, having not led at any point throughout the season, managed to win it in the final race and become Formula 1's youngest ever world champion. He had a controversial season, that's absolutely no doubt, but it was quite crazy not having led out of the championship at any point the entire season, then finally winning the last race and claiming the World Drivers' Championship. Now, Red Bull managed to seal 2010 with the constructors as well, winning it in Brazil, and obviously finished in first place with 498 points. But it must be said that it was not a perfect season for them with 5 retirements altogether. But if you include all of the brake issues and stuff like that, races that they still finished, but they lost loads of points in, it was more like 7 at the end of the season. So they definitely still had reliability issues, and it's something that, like I said, will creep up quite a lot. But in the end, it was Sebastian Vettel to make the difference. His last late season push was just on another level, and yeah, I mean, he deserved the title in the end. And like I said, youngest ever at the time, and still is, actually, I suppose. So a great achievement for Sebastian Vettel, but a great achievement for Red Bull as well. Their first ever world championship, and a real marker of intent, just showing that they were now the dominant force in Formula 1, not only in their drivers, but in car design as well. Now, with 2011 also came some new rule changes, and quite big changes actually for Formula 1. There was now the introduction of both KERS and DRS, as well as the brand new Pirelli tyres, which were a completely different animal to the previous Bridgestones in 2009 and 2010. And lastly, there were some aero changes, with the double diffuser now being banned for 2011. Now, once again, the genius that is Adrian Newey, and you're going to hear me saying this quite a lot, to be honest, in this episode, designed what can only be described as one of the best cars in Formula 1 history. The RB7 in 2011 was even more dominant than the RB6 from 2010, and he said that it was an evolution of cars from 2009 to 2011. They were all not really massively different, but just always building upon what they had. Like now, that RB7 from 2011 was just wow. It was quite a car, and the biggest innovation that was on there was the exhaust blown diffuser, massively controversial throughout the entire season. But to basically explain what it did is it gave a huge amount of rear downforce, despite the need of some style of driving changes. It was a little bit, it's quite difficult to explain, but it needed a bit of a different sort of driving style, but yeah, to get the maximum effect out of it. But also made an incredible noise, so gnarly. Like, it just search up on YouTube double diffuser in Monza or something, and you'll just hear how crazy it sounded. It was a really cool thing to be added to Formula 1, but definitely controversial throughout the entire season. Now, throughout 2011, Red Bull were constantly being accused about their 2011 car with so much controversy, especially at the Silverstone Grand Prix. But eventually, they were allowed to keep their blown diffuser because it passed every single test that the FIA had. Adrian Newey, he designed the car that was once again skating on the right side of the rules, let's just say, and was again a magnificent car that was very, very dominant. Now, something also that made this car very successful was its reliability. The reliability that plagued them in 2010. And not just 2010, but throughout their history was sort of gone for 2011, and it was only really a couple of KERS issues for both Sebastian Vettel and Mark Webber early on in the season, but except from that, they only had one retirement throughout the entire season. Now, with this amazing car, it was no surprise that Red Bull once again did take the World Championship in 2011, and Sebastian Vettel, and this time without a shadow of a doubt, was head and shoulders above everyone else in 2011, dominating the season, and it was not a troubled season for him at all. There was no pressure. He managed to take 11 wins and 15 pole positions and 17 podiums. I mean, wow, it really showed how talented Sebastian Vettel was. And one other thing that really sort of was a big positive for him is that he managed to get to grips with the Pirelli tyres, which Mark Webber, he sort of struggled a little bit more, and those Pirellis were a serious factor in that 2011 season. But I mean, Sebastian Vettel, with the car performance, with his speed, managing those new Pirelli tyres, he never gave anyone else a sniff of the title. I mean, he pretty much won it a third. He pretty much looked like he was going to win it a third of the way through the season. And yeah, a very, very dominant display from him in 2011. Now, with Sebastian Vettel dominating the 2011 season, there was also a bit of a reoccurring thing happening with Sebastian, which is his almost famous, and this is from his Red Bull days, him out front and sometimes he had so much pace in hand that he was sometimes doing even one more pit stop than everyone else, and always trying to set fastest lap. It became a bit of a joke, actually, of Sebastian always out front trying to set fastest lap and ignoring the team when they just wanted him to finish the race. So it just showed how much of a performance step up it really had. And I mean, he had some incredible races. I mean, Korea it springs to mind, finishing 12 seconds ahead of the field and setting fastest lap as well. But Mark Webber really could not manage that throughout the entire season and never had Vettel's pace. He struggled a lot more with the tyre compounds, and like I said, had a few KERS issues as well, and only managed one win with 3 poles and 10 podiums. However, some good news, I suppose. The team had no more driver issues like they did in 2010. It was a lot better managed. They did actually implement team orders now, which I think is a positive, by the way. I think they needed to get to grips with their team and just score the max amount of points. I mean, 2010 was a bit of a joke, to be honest, in my opinion, and it clearly showed favoritism. So I'm happy that their team management sorted out a little bit, although we know that it definitely did not get sorted out full stop, but I'll get onto that in a little bit later. And in the end, I suppose, in 2011, Red Bull finished first in the Constructors with 650 points, a huge amount of points, wrapping up in South Korea with 3 races to go, and Vettel claiming his 2nd consecutive world title and wrapping up in Japan with 4 races to go, and just showing the level of dominance dominance that Vettel had in that 2011 car, and when he's given that quick car, he doesn't mess about. He didn't make a single mistake throughout the season and was just unstoppable. Now in 2012, it would be a much more difficult season for Red Bull. They no longer had the most dominant car on the field, and it took them up until the 4th race to actually win their first race with Sebastian Vettel in Bahrain. Now, they also, once again, the RB8, it wasn't a bad car by any means of the imagination. It was a quick car once again, but Sebastian Vettel described it as lacking a bit of drivability, and once again came under fire for its for some legal issues as well. And this seems to be a reoccurring theme with Red Bull. Every single time they try to put something on their car or that Adrian Newey designed, it always seemed to skate along the rules, and many teams protested. And 2012, like I said, with the RB8, it was no different. It came under fire for its rear floor, throttle mapping, and even some suspension changes in Parc Fermé. But despite all of this, like I said, it wasn't the best car on the grid anymore. The McLaren was much more competitive, and in general, the 2012 field was so tight. We even saw wins from Williams, and there was actually 7 different winners in the first 7 races. So it just showed how close the season was. Like I said, Sebastian took his first win in Bahrain on the 4th race, and then Mark Webber took a further 2 wins in both Silverstone and Monaco, making it 3 in a row for Red Bull at Monte Carlo. Now, looking at the Red Bull drivers in that first part of the season, it really did seem like Mark Webber actually had the edge over Sebastian Vettel in the first part of the season. He was a little bit more consistent at scoring points, and Vettel actually was struggling a little bit. Reliability was a factor. He actually retired whilst leading the race in Valencia with an alternator failure, and then he got involved in a couple of incidents, like there was of course the crash with Narain Khan in Malaysia, which became quite famous because of course Vettel called Narain a cucumber, which is quite a famous thing now. So that was one of the best. That was one of the best things about the 2012 season. Calling the Narain Khan a cucumber, Sebastian Vettel. He really did a number on the HRT driver there, and also getting a penalty whilst racing with Jenson Button at the German Grand Prix. And all of this meant that Seb, he really wasn't as mentally strong in 2012. He really was making mistakes. He was slipping up a little bit, and it showed at the halfway point of the season. Whilst Alonso was leading the championship by 40 points, Mark Webber was in 2nd and Sebastian Vettel in 3rd. So definitely a mountain to climb for them in the second part of the season. However, despite their setbacks, and we've seen this time and time again now, very reminiscent of 2010, Red Bull and Sebastian Vettel especially came back stronger than ever at the end of the season. The car was developed really, really well and was much stronger than it was at the beginning of the season. And it just excelled in that final part of 2012, taking 4 wins from the last 9 races and 7 podiums, and that was for, of course, Sebastian Vettel. He really, once again, like I said, this was almost 2010 all over again. He just stepped up in that second part of the season, and even when he did have a sort of rough weekend in Abu Dhabi, having to start from the back of the grid due to an issue, I think it was a fuel issue in qualifying, he ended up finishing on the podium through, yes, a little bit of safety car luck, no doubt about that, but some incredible racing as well. So he was really on top of his game and managed to take it to a title decider for Brazil with Fernando Alonso for the 2012 finale. Now, while Sebastian Vettel was on a resurgence after the summer break, Mark Webber just could not match him. He did not have a very good second half of the season, and despite obviously leading into the second half of the season, he actually ended up dropping off the championship fight, and definitely due to some misfortune. He had an alternator failure as well, and also some accidents and incidents with the likes of Romain Grosjean. And yeah, like I said, this sadly meant that despite his consistent beginning to the season, he would not have a chance at winning the championship in 2012. Now, all these incredible results for Sebastian Vettel meant that after one of the best ever Grand Prix to watch, if anyone remembers the 2012 Brazilian Grand Prix, oh my god, it had so many twists and turns in changeable conditions, and it was a great watch. I really recommend it if you can find it somewhere. But in the end, he managed to overhaul a massive deficit over the second half of the season and win the 2012 World Championship with Red Bull, a 3rd consecutive title for Sebastian. I really felt sorry for Fernando in that year, to be honest. I thought he deserved it more, but Sebastian did a good job. You just can't deny that. And Red Bull gave him a good car as well, winning their 3rd constructors for 2012 as well with 460 points. So an impressive season by Sebastian, maybe not his best one ever, but just performing under pressure and clawing back that deficit, I really think is impressive after the summer break. And just despite having a great car, Alonso definitely didn't, but in the end of the day, Sebastian won the title and he deserved it. Now, for 2013, Red Bull were the dominant force in Formula One. They had just won the previous 3 championships in both constructors and the drivers consecutively, and they also had some new business on board. They were now linked with Infinity, who of course had a link to their engine supplier Renault. And once again, for the 2013 season, Adrian Newey, proving why he is the greatest F1 designer, produced a fantastic car. It was quick once again from the off. With Sebastian Vettel, I mean, in the first part of the season, taking 4 wins and 3 pole positions with 7 podiums in the first 10 races. Very, very impressive. But Mark Webber, sadly, unlike previous years, he just didn't seem to be able to challenge Vettel in the first part of the season with only 3 podiums, no wins, and no pole positions as well. It really was a change of form. Mark usually definitely stood up to Vettel, especially in 2010 and 2012, but just didn't seem to have the same pace at the start in 2013, while Sebastian, again, using that incredible car, was just on it. Now, whilst Mark and Sebastian's relationship was never good, it had improved since the Turkey incident from 2010, but by far the biggest talking point of 2013 in Red Bull was Malaysia. Now, after running 1-2 with Mark Webber leading and looking like he'll win his first race of the season, Vettel ignored team orders and battled hard to overtake Mark Webber, and ignoring the team, and overtook him to win the race in the end. Now, team orders had been used by Red Bull before after the whole 2010 Turkey crash, like Silverstone in 2011, that was one of them. They were never happy with them, but I think they were a positive for the team, and they were keeping the drivers in check. Obviously, this was a very, very big and controversial decision by Sebastian Vettel to go against his team and disobey his team orders. Mark Webber understandably was furious, claiming that Seb will have protection as usual. And once again, it just showed and almost asked questions about who is really running the team. I mean, is Sebastian Vettel bigger than the team? That definitely was a big question, and the team management of Red Bull was called in question, basically. I mean, are they doing everything they can to keep their drivers in check? I mean, Sebastian Vettel, what was quite stunning, although he was apologetic at first after Malaysia, saying, I shouldn't have done it and everything, what's stunning is that when he came back for the next race in China, he actually doubled down and said, actually, I did do the right thing, and I would do it again because Mark didn't deserve the win. So, quite amazing. He was very arrogant at this point, and I mean, once again, just showing that he's bigger, almost making himself bigger than the team, which is never a good sign, and clearly it was frustrating Mark Webber, and I think he had had enough at that point of Red Bull and Sebastian Vettel and the management as well. He just sort of fell out of love in Formula 1, in my opinion, and of course announced his retirement in June of that year to leave Red Bull and join Porsche for their endurance races. So it was a very, very big moment in Formula 1, that whole team orders incident. And like I said, it caused Mark Webber to leave Formula 1. And his replacement would be Aussie for Aussie, Daniel Ricciardo, who would join from Toro Rosso to replace him for 2014. Now, going into the summer break, whilst Mercedes were beginning to show signs of getting faster with Hamilton and Rosberg producing good results, and Ferrari once again delivering a decent package for Fernando Alonso, it almost looked like we might even have a bit of a closer fight towards the end of the season. But no, Sebastian Vettel came back even stronger in the second part of the season. And what's amazing, I mean, Christian Horner said that there was nothing radical changed about the car from the first part of the season to the second part, only a few sort of aero tweaks. Sebastian just went up a level, and this is one of the most famous sort of runs in terms of wins ever. From Spa to Abu Dhabi, he set a brand new record, 9 wins in a row, previously held by Michael Schumacher. He once again dominated races with his trademark style of always leading out front and also always going for fastest lap. I mean, culminating his best performance was in Singapore 2013, won the race by 30 seconds, got pole position and fastest lap as well. 30 seconds he won over second place. I mean, this level of dominance wasn't pleasing a lot of people, and he was even booed on the podium at Singapore, and he was really painted as the bad guy of Formula 1 after the whole team orders incident with Mark Webber, and being a serial winner, he was really painted as the bad guy, and he was booed on the podium, and it was actually kind of horrible to see, because you should never be jealous of success. You should always admire it, and it's really, it wasn't good to see, but he obviously took it in his stride and had one of the best ever ends to a season you can have. I mean, by the end of 2013, Red Bull had capped off the V8 era with 4 consecutive constructors and drivers title, finishing with 596 points, and Sebastian Vettel firmly placing himself as one of the greatest F1 drivers of all time, up there with Senna, Prost and Schumacher. But yeah, I mean, despite immense criticisms as well from the likes of fans, other teams, and drivers like Fernando Alonso, He just did it his own way. And again, everyone always says that it was the car and not Vettel, but 9 wins in a row when your teammate can't even match you, that is next level. And of course, I cannot end 2013 without mentioning Mark Webber as well, retiring from Formula 1 and a really, really missed figure in Formula 1. He was not only hugely quick, but a straight-talking guy with a massive amount of Aussie grit, and even to this day, I really miss him, and he was a fantastic racing driver. So now the final season we're going to talk about is 2014, and a season that was very, very different for Red Bull. Of course, there were brand new rule changes with 2014 being now the hybrid era, with the V6 hybrid power units replacing the V8s. But more importantly, this was now the era of power units. Up until 2013, in my opinion, was sort of the era of aero, and it was all about what kind of trick designs you can put, and that's why Adrian Newey was so successful. He's an incredible aerodynamicist, and that's why he put all those incredible designs out. But now in 2014, it was all about the era of power units, and Red Bull had less control over this. Of course, Renault were their engine suppliers, and immediately from testing, it was obvious that Renault had not only a slow engine, but a hugely unreliable one as well. Red Bull had minimal running over 2014 winter testing and only did 1,500 kilometers compared to Mercedes 9,000. So they were definitely going into a disadvantage going into the season. Now, it was clear that Red Bull were not on the same level as Mercedes, who dominated the beginning of the hybrid era. But despite all of this, the beginning of the season, Daniel Ricciardo, who obviously replaced Mark Webber, emerged as a massive talent in Formula 1. He actually got a podium in his first ever race in Australia in his home Grand Prix, but subsequently got disqualified actually for a fuel flow sensor issue. But nonetheless, he had an amazing performance and a great debut, and it was actually Vettel who went on to achieve the team's first official podium in Malaysia. But it became very clear that it was Ricciardo who had the edge over his experienced teammate. He had a brilliant start to his Red Bull career, and despite a lack of performance from the Red Bull, he had podiums in Spain and Monaco and delivered the team's first ever win in the hybrid era in Canada. So it was a great performance, and he definitely, like I said, emerged as not only a huge talent, but such a likable character and instantly fast, and became known as one of the last of the late lunchers, and became known to this day as one of the best overtakers on the F1 grid. Now, whilst the season was a disappointment by Red Bull standards, Daniel Ricciardo went on to beat Vettel in the championship by a big margin, and took the 3 wins in his debut season, with back-to-back wins in Hungary and Spa, as well as 8 podiums. Sebastian Vettel, on the other hand, after winning 4 consecutive world championships, just really wasn't the same. He was doubting himself over the course of 2014 and clearly lacked confidence and self-belief. He finished the season with only 4 podiums, and after a struggling season, he decided in a shock twist to leave the team that had just given him 4 back-to-back world titles and join Ferrari to replace the outgoing Fernando Alonso. And it was a massive shock. Just remember, he had been with Red Bull since he was 12. He joined the program, and it was quite crazy to see him leave. I mean, it was just a massive shock, but I suppose it had to happen, and it all turned out for the best, I suppose. And at the end, it was Daniel Kvyat, who was another Toro Rosso junior driver and a very quick driver as well, who would replace Sebastian Vettel in 2015 to partner Daniel Ricciardo. So Red Bull had been finally stopped from their consecutive success by Mercedes, and finished the season in second place in the Constructors with 405 points, with Daniel Ricciardo in second and Sebastian Vettel in fifth. But it must be said that the most important thing that did happen throughout 2014 was their public bashing of Renault, their engine supplier. Comments from both sides had sparked controversy, and although their relationship, even in the V8 era, wasn't the best, 2014 there was a rift that began to form, that would just get bigger and bigger and bigger as it got later into the hybrid era. But we are going to be talking a lot more about that in the next episode. But there you go, guys. That is part 2, and this has been one of the longest ever videos I've ever had to make, maybe even the longest. So sorry that it was that long, but I really wanted to put as much detail about the dominance of Red Bull, and there was definitely a lot to talk about. In the next episode, we are going to be going through the rest of the hybrid era, and also looking into Max Verstappen, Daniel Kvyat, and we're going to be looking into 2019 and the Honda deal as well. Hopefully you've enjoyed this episode. Once again, I apologize that it's been so long, but I tried to really put as much detail as I can about the relationship between the drivers and Sebastian Vettel's dominance, and Adrian Newey as well. So I hope you've enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, guys.